USS Slater, a Cannon-class escort destroyer, is stationed at the port of Albany, the capital of the state of New York. Ships of this class had modest speed and firepower, experienced extreme rolling during storms, and had tight spaces inside. Sailors sparingly call them tin cans.
Space per man on a U.S. destroyer escort was 1/6 of what the U.S. Bureau of Prisons said a prisoner had to have at a shoreside penitentiary. Much tighter than prisoners, and there was a chance that you might drown.
Some people had to get off the ship because they couldn't stay in that much time just out there bouncing around in the ocean.
Submarine could lay off, they could fire torpedoes and be out of our range of our sonar.
However, it was these destroyers that crushed the wolfpacks, German Kriegsmarine submarines, during World War II in the Atlantic.
I guess I knew from the very beginning that I was going to be killed, but it didn't happen.
During the initial years of World War II, the German submarines were basically masters of the Atlantic. England needed military aid badly. The country awaited convoys from the other side of the ocean, but the Allies weren't able to counteract the enemy effectively. There was no system of anti-submarine defense at that time. Convoys had poor protection, while the wolfpacks of Admiral Dönitz were merciless and almost unstoppable. A single submarine of Hitler's destroyed cost 16 sunk ships departed from the US.
You know, we needed to have supplies sent to our allies in Europe and later to our own forces, and they had to cross large body of water where they were subject to attack by the enemy navy or submarines or whatever.
Special destroyers for escorting convoys were ordered by the British government from the USA by Lend-Lease in 1941. But after joining the war, the USA changed their priorities for mass production of other ship types and cargo vessels. That's why Everts and Buckley-class escort destroyers joined the Allied fleet only starting in 1943. The first ships were equipped with just K guns and 76mm guns.
The British didn't think very much of this gun at all on the 78 ships that we loaned them, because they swore that they saw these armor-piercing projectiles bounce off submarine hulls.
Nevertheless, the escort destroyers joined the naval forces by the dozen and played a significant part in the battle for the Atlantic. Both the numbers and quality of performance of the US escort ships increased. The third series of the Cannon-class destroyers was equipped with a diesel-electric power plant, providing 2 times greater cruising range than the previous Buckley-class possessed. The lead ship, out of 72 constructed, USS Cannon, entered service in the fall of 1943, and USS Slater on May 1, 1944. USS Slater performance characteristics on September 1945. Length more than 93 meters, beam more than 11 meters, draft more than 3 meters, total displacement 1,620 tons. Armament: 3 single 3-inch 50 cal Mark 22 guns.
They were originally designed, the destroyer escorts were supposed to have the very effective 5-inch 38 caliber gun, which fired a 54-pound projectile. But because supply outdistanced demand, they couldn't make these guns fast enough, so destroyer escorts ended up with kind of an obsolete 3-inch 50 caliber gun that only fired a 26-pound projectile.
Anti-aircraft artillery: 6 40mm Bofors guns in twin mounts, 18 20mm Oerlikon guns in twin mounts, anti-submarine armament and torpedoes, Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar, 1 triple 21-inch torpedo tubes as commissioned, 8 depth charge projectors, 2 depth charge racks. Power plant: 4 GM Mod 16-278A diesel engines with electric drive, Power around 6,000 horsepower.
Would overhaul the engines, one cylinder every 1,800 hours. Pull out the piston, the liner, mic them up, see what the wear dimensions are, and then rebuild it back together.
Maximum speed 21 knots. Cruising range 10,800 miles at 12-knot speed. Cannon-class escort destroyer crew up to 220 men.
When we talk about warships, we always talk about the machinery. We talk about the caliber of the guns, we talk about how many torpedoes they carried, or we talk about how fast a ship was. But that's only part of the equation. The other half of the equation is the crew, and the crew morale and their willingness to fight. And that's directly affected by the kind of captain that they have. Normally with the big ships, you have tugs to bring you in and out of port. And during World War II, with the destroyer escorts and the destroyers, they were always expected to get underway and a big dock, come back into the dock by themselves without tugboats. Now that required a lot of skill on the part of the captain in terms of ship handling. If the captain was a bad ship handler and tended to go alongside the other ships doing damage, or when they did underway replenishment and went alongside tankers to take on oil, if the captain couldn't control the ship and collided with a tanker, that embarrassed the whole crew and tended to affect morale, and that ship wouldn't have as high morale as a ship with a good where the captain was a really good ship handler.
The majority of officers on escort destroyers were reservists who had graduated from civilian universities. They passed intensive naval training, which lasted for 3 months. Due to that, the crew on such ships was often called a 90-day miracle, while sailors were sent to the Submarine Hunter Training Center in Key West and in the Bermudas.
When I first went in the Navy, I didn't know anything at all about any of this business. And when they sent me to the sonar school, Key West, there they had all of the things and they trained you on them. And the training was very intense. And they used to take you out from Key West on a ship with all the gear, and then they'd bring one of our own submarines along for us to try to work against, to see whether or not we were able to contact them and follow them and so on and so forth. So we got a lot of that kind of training before we ever went to the actual real thing.
And here they go, sailors who've never been on a ship, on board a ship that's never been to sea. But before they do any fighting, the ship and her crew spend some time in getting acquainted, a shakedown.
I got on board, and the chief says, "Kid, what are you here for?" I said, "I'm here to be an electrician, mate." And he says, "You may want to be an electrician, mate, but we need enginemen." So I wound up in the engine room. Closed room, it was always over 100 degrees temperature-wise, and you'd be rolling almost over on its side. Everybody was getting seasick, and it would be going this way as well as this way, and sometimes both. And you'd have to serve your duty on watches, whether you were seasick or not. Such a small ship, but it was a good game. We had some good times together, and we had some, once in a while, we had a little battle, a little fisticuffs, but when you're out to sea for three and a half weeks, and you don't see anybody, you don't have good food, you get on each other's nerves. When we went on Liberty, we didn't care if it was a boatswain mate from top deck or engineman from bottom deck. We partied.
And liberty. But wherever they go, sailors are sure to find courteous, uniformed guides who will point out the recommended places, and those not quite so highly thought of.
During training and short vacations, the crew would bond, and, as a rule, after the sea trials of their ship, they were considered ready for battle.
And everything the Navy gave a sailor was supposed to fit into this sea bag. There was also a joke that the navies had about sailors who wanted to get married. They used to say that if the Navy had wanted you to have a wife, they would have issued you one with your sea bag, you know. So that was the Navy's way of discouraging sailors from getting married. And then the Navy gave you a mattress and a hammock, and that was all supposed to be rolled up around the sea bag, so when you moved from one ship to another, you just carried the sea bag, the mattress, and the hammock over your shoulder in a package. And then they had the dress blue hat. And prior to World War II, that had the name of your ship on it. But during World War II, since that was a military secret, it just said U.S. Navy.
It doesn't take long to get the sailors' handsome luggage on board, but it does take time to stow an amazing amount of ammunition. Depth charges are still among the most effective weapons against submarines. So we take a few along.
During the war, the small ships did a great deal. They freed up everything, all the big ones, so they could go. In other words, we did the convoy work, we did the patrol work, we patrolled the harbors and so forth. The convoys met the battle, the submarines. They used a lot of small ships in the invasions. So not only did they convoy in, but they were firepower to fight aircraft. They used them for aircraft.
In case of necessity, escort destroyers could defend against any attacking surface ships or aviation. But, nonetheless, their primary task was to fight against enemy submarines. For that purpose, USS Slater and other Cannon-class ships were equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance systems for that time. In addition, the ship had a very small turning circle radius, providing good maneuverability.
We would send out a signal. When the signal would bounce off something and come back to us, that was a sign that we perhaps had a submarine. Now, of course, that could have been caused by other things, rocks on the bottom or various other things. So you had to determine by the nature of the sound what it was that you were looking at, and whether the object moved too, or the submarine would move where the rock wouldn't, you know.
World War II sonar had a problem. It could only scan ahead of the ship. So when a destroyer escort got on top of a submarine, it lost contact, so that the submarine is trying to get out from under you. So to solve this problem, the World War II destroyer escort wanted to put as many depth charges in the water as it could in a short period of time over a wide area. So to do that, we had the 2 depth charge racks in the fantail, and then we also had depth charge projectors, 4 on each side of the ship. And with a depth charge projector, you basically were throwing a depth charge over the side of the ship about 75 yards. And the way this worked was it had an impulse charge in it, and you put the impulse charge into the breach, and then that black powder explosion would detonate and blow this arbor plate over the side. The separation point was right here, and the depth charge was chained to it, and that would go out about 75 yards. So you've got 4 of these going off either side, and you've got dropping 4 off the back end, so you're getting as wide an area as you can to try to sink that submarine. These were pressure sensitive. Basically, you set the depth that you wanted the depth charge to explode at, and at that depth, water pressure would overcome spring tension and detonate the depth charge. So you had to guess what the depth of the submarine was. The problem with that was all that noise in the water basically destroyed any chance the sonar operator would have of hearing the submarine. To overcome these problems, the British developed a World War II anti-submarine rocket called the Hedgehog. Basically, the Hedgehog was a 24 projectile launcher that fired this type of projectile over the forward gun against a submarine. You had the propellant back here, explosive charge right here that would actually pierce the submarine's hull, and a fuse on the end that actually rotated when it hit the water, so it was like a safety feature that kept this from detonating aboard the ship. Now, these only detonated if it actually hit the submarine. So if you got an explosion with one of these rockets, you basically knew that you had hit the submarine. Other than that, they would just fall to the bottom. And this turned out to be a much more effective weapon against the submarines than the depth charge.
In 1943, the entire anti-submarine defense system began operating at full strength as a united mechanism. It comprised shipborne seek and destroy groups, escort aircraft carriers, and land-based anti-submarine aviation. Additionally, the method of defining the approximate location of German submarines using radio direction finders was deployed.
And also we come out with what they call a Huff-Duff, which was nothing but a radio detector, signal detector, and what they set up stations along the coast. They would try to pick up the German when they talked on the radio, and we would also at sea with our ship, we would try to pick them up, and where the two of them crossed, we knew that's where the German sub was, and we could send airplanes out or ships that were close to that, and we got a lot of the German subs this way.
According to the statistics from the headquarters of Fleet 10 of the US, commanding and coordinating the entire system of anti-submarine defense across the Atlantic, every enemy submarine destroyed in 1941 was equal to 16 Allied vessels sunk. In 1943, that number was reduced to 2 vessels for every submarine destroyed. And in the spring of 1944, Germans paid with a submarine sunk for almost every destroyed Allied vessel. The Kriegsmarine submarines managed to sink just 2 Allied escort destroyers. By the end of summer 1944, German submarines turned out to be completely incapable of cutting off the supply lines from the USA to a new front in Europe. Seek and destroy groups and small escort destroyers within those groups won the battle for the Atlantic with the aid of radar, high-frequency direction finders, and multi-barrel projectors, as well as the coordinated action and the dedication of their crews.
When you get up in those situations, you feel fear. And the only thing is, you do things automatic. You don't even think about doing it. People were trained so well that it helped.
I had a job to do. I thought the job was an important job, and so I just did what I was assigned to do.
When the war in Europe ended, USS Slater was sent to the Pacific Ocean, where she served until the end of the year. She was then placed in reserve and later transferred to the Greek Navy. In 1993, thanks to donations from veteran sailors of escort destroyers from across the country, the ship was returned to the USA. And on October 26, 1997, she was stationed at the port of Albany. Today, USS Slater serves as a museum, telling the story of one part of World War II and a monument to the simple heroes who served on such small ships.